Good morning in North America and good afternoon to Europe and especially my hometown Athens. I am Katerina Sokou. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Washington DC correspondent for KATHIMERINI and Sky TV. It's a pleasure to welcome you all and an honor for me to moderate this Delphi Economic Forum and Atlantic Council webinar. At the Atlantic Council, we've taken our events online and used the opportunity to reach the wider audience, and I'm glad to see the Delphi Economic Forum doing the same with a diverse and timely program that is complementing its famous annual forum in Delphi. This event brings together the Atlantic Council focus on transatlantic cooperation and regional expertise, and Delphi's valuable on-the-ground experience throughout Southeastern Europe to address one of the major challenges that we are all trying to decode. What is the COVID-19 crisis? How is it changing the world? And the balance of power in it? This question is even more relevant in the Western Balkans, a region which has historically been a battleground for influence among major powers. A big step was made recently with the EU foreign minister's decision to open membership negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania. I should note by video conference. This decision was heralded as a sign that the EU is still able to take strategic decisions, even at times of crisis such as the coronavirus outbreak. Yet the EU response to the health crisis in the region has been slow. The US has given the impression that it's not interested in leading a global response, and there is little transatlantic coordination. Meanwhile, countries such as Russia, China, and Turkey were quick to send help. Russia and China to Serbia, Turkey also to Kosovo, North Macedonia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Montenegro. It goes without saying that humanitarian aid should be commended no matter who provides it, and I can think of worse things than trying to cultivate soft power. Yet the pandemic has stoked domestic and international rivalries and inflamed pre-existing political tensions in the region. So the real question is, will this crisis cause a shift in political alignment in the region towards authoritarian states? And what can the transatlantic community do to promote stability in the region? With us to discuss these questions, we have an amazing panel of experts and policymakers. Next to me on the screen, I'm honored to welcome Minister Nikola Dimitrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of North Macedonia. And then below us, from left to right, Admiral Alexandros Diakopoulos, who is the National Security Advisor to the Greek Prime Minister, Matthew Palmer, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary, the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs at the US Department of State, and I should note the Washington Special Envoy to the Western Balkans, and of course Damon Wilson, the Executive Vice President, Programs and Strategy at the Atlantic Council. So, gentlemen, if I may start with the Minister Dimitrov, could you please give us an initial idea of how you're handling COVID-19 in your country and what you see the major challenges going forward for you?
First of all, warm greetings to you, the fellow panelists, and all the audience that is following this online. This is my second participation at the Delphi Economic Forum. The first one was in person, so I hope that we're going to be able to do that next year as well. I have to say that there are some advantages to be there in person as opposed to this online video conferencing that we do most of the time these days. I have to underscore what you said in your announcement, the decision of the European Union to start accession talks with my country, North Macedonia, and neighboring Albania. The fact that this decision was made under COVID-19 circumstances is telling. And as I said on my Twitter that day, 25th of March, this is a beam of light in this darkness imposed by the coronavirus all around us. Only 2 days after, on 27th of March, we had another very historic milestone. We joined NATO. And talking in particular to the Greek audience, I would like to stress how far we have come as two friends and neighbors, and now also former allies. Both, I'm thinking about the negotiations that led to the Prespa agreement, in its implementation, and I feel privileged and fortunate to have been able to make a personal contribution to this, I think, historic success. As with all our neighbors, all countries in the region, Europe and globally, we mostly follow the advice of our epidemiologists in terms of following, introducing restrictive measures. I think we started early, which was very positive. We tried to build the capacity of the health system in parallel. As of today, we are loosening up some of these restrictive measures because of the economy. We are very worried as to the impact of this frozen life, so to speak, on the economy of North Macedonia, of our region. I think in terms of the big picture, and I will end this initial intervention here, it's important to recognize that what we do in this emergency situation, where we are pressed to make decisions fast, will have longer term consequences on the world we essentially face after the coronavirus crisis. And I think the world that we would like to see after is a world where there is more and not less global solidarity. We've been working closely hand in hand with all our neighbors and the countries in the region and our friends, both in NATO and the European Union. It is true that the European Union was initially somewhat slow in terms of its response, but European solidarity now is extremely visible. It was yesterday that the Commission announced a micro financial package that includes our region. North Macedonia itself will get about 160 million euros to mitigate the economic consequences of the crisis. This followed after 4 million that was used to purchase medical equipment, close to 60 that was targeting the business sector. We received bilateral help using both the EU but also the NATO crisis mechanisms that we are now part of. And I would especially like to thank the Commission that moved and accepted the kind requests of the whole region for us to be excluded from the special authorization mechanism that was established when it comes to medical products, protective gear needed to face COVID. We are in all of this together, and I think with solidarity, we will overcome this crisis.
Thank you, Minister. Alexandros Diakopoulos, Greece has been very successful in containing the crisis and the health crisis. And as we're moving to the next phase of opening or starting to reopen the economy, how do you see the prospects for cooperation, greater cooperation with the Balkans, and how do you see the security situation in the Balkans evolving after this pandemic?
Thank you very much, Katerina. I want to extend my greetings to everybody who's watching us right now, and of course to our fellow panelists. Yes, Greece, I think that it's a wide accepted idea that Greece has done a very good job so far regarding the coronavirus and our actions. We took our actions very early on, and strictly enough to contain it. But I believe the whole Balkans have done a good job. I mean, as far as I know, Balkan countries have done a very good job in general. And that's good for the area because after many years that we had bad publicity, now we are becoming an example for the rest, for the way that we have reacted to this pandemic. Now, regarding the security situation, we see two contradicting trends. One is for the nation states in general, I mean, an entrenchment back to the nation state, each one for himself, a self-help mode, Hobbesian somehow. But on the other hand, we see the need for more cooperation, namely scientific, but this could be expanded to cover other areas as well. Economy is one for sure. So I believe that we need to continue on the second trend, the trend of cooperation. Cooperation in general pays off more than confrontation, and we need more cooperation on this area, more cooperation with our neighbor countries, more cooperation in the transatlantic community and the European Union. And I believe that we should have the United States leadership to guide this cooperation. The United States should not leave the area, should not leave Europe or the transatlantic values in order to go to manage to pass the troubles that are coming ahead, because we're going to face a very difficult economic times in the near future. And this cannot be done by one country alone. We have to understand that.
Thank you, and this is a perfect cue for Mr. Palmer, whose mission as special envoy for Western Balkans is to lead the U.S. efforts to strengthen diplomatic engagement in support of stability, peace, and prosperity for the region, and focus on the integration of Western Balkans, of course, into Western institutions, which has been going great so far. But what has the U.S. support and humanitarian assistance to Southeastern Europe, and in particular to the Western Balkan countries, been like at the aftermath of COVID-19? And are you working together with Europe in any of those initiatives?
Thanks very much for the question, Katerina. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today, and thank you to both Delphi and the Atlantic Council for working to organize this event. I think it's a very important opportunity to bring folks together to talk about the singular issue on the global agenda today. The COVID-19 pandemic is an issue that transcends borders. It's one that transcends politics. It is the priority issue for every government on the face of planet Earth right now. And the United States is working together with the countries of the Western Balkans and Southeast Europe, along with our partners in Europe, to deliver assistance and to play our part in a global response to a global challenge. The United States has put on the table immediately some $750 million in assistance around the world. Some of that money, of course, is directed to programming directly in the countries of the Western Balkans. Some of that money goes to support the work of the key international institutions that are active in responding to the challenge of the pandemic. And here I would underscore that the United States has been and continues to be the single largest contributor to the bulk of the international institutions, including the UN system, the World Bank, the IMF, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. When these institutions take action, either in response to immediate health challenges or to prop up economies in a period of intense economic and fiscal pressure, much of that money and support is coming directly from the United States. In addition, the American public has stepped up to offer support to countries in need. In total, we estimate that private Americans have contributed some $3 billion in response to the challenges of COVID. I can't break that down in terms of how much is going to support activities in the Western Balkans, but that's the totality of the global response. On top of that, you have American companies who are stepping up to contribute. In the Balkans, we've seen Coca-Cola and Sheraton and Microsoft and IBM step up and make contributions. Some of it is in kind, some of it is direct financial assistance, some of it is technical know-how. I think Nikola can speak to the work that Apple and Google have done in supporting the government of North Macedonia as they've put out their informational website specific to COVID-19 to ensure that the public in North Macedonia is properly informed and countering the disinformation that's out there. I would also like to underscore, Katerina, if I may, that assistance and support and solidarity, it doesn't go in just one direction. This is not just the United States taking steps to support our partners in the Western Balkans. The countries in the Western Balkans have also stepped up in support of the United States. And I think here in particular of the partnership that we have enjoyed with Serbia, with Montenegro, with Albania in helping to repatriate American citizens from those countries at low or no cost to the travelers. It's a remarkable demonstration of partnership and solidarity, one that we're grateful for, one that we value. But the United States is there in the region, on the continent, standing shoulder to shoulder with allies and partners and working to respond collectively to this collective challenge. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. And Damon, if I may turn to you, from the Atlantic Council and the think tank world, I'm wondering, how are you viewing this the situation as it's evolving in the Western Balkans in particular, but frankly, throughout the transatlantic partnership after the COVID-19 outbreak, and given that we've also seen charm offensives or big power projections amid the pandemic from countries sending help not only to the Western Balkans, but I can think of Russia, for example, sending help in the United States as well. How do you see this playing out, and how do you think it will affect the balance of power going forward, especially in areas like the Balkans, which are still trying to integrate into the European institutions?
Thank you very much, Katerina. It's a real pleasure for the Atlantic Council to join Delphi Economic Forum for this conversation. So delighted to have our guests on. And I do regret that we aren't doing this in person in Delphi, but I'm glad we're able to have the conversation now. Look, we're in the midst of a truly, it can be a cliche to say, but in this case, it's not an unprecedented crisis. It's first and foremost about people. It's a health crisis. But it's also an economic one. It is increasingly going to become a political one, and it has the potential to become a security one. You can imagine some strategic shocks that could flow from this, particularly as we look out across the developing world. I don't think that is the case in Southeast Europe, however. So this is a time when many of the trends that we were facing already, the struggle of democracies versus autocracies and kleptocracy, the real prism of great power competition, the questioning of how the future of capitalism works. These issues are all on the table, and this pandemic is, in some respects, accentuating some of those mega trends that our societies were grappling with. So the premise of this conversation, up for grabs. I think we need to underscore, we've seen a lot of challenges, a lot of mistakes. We've seen less than desirable, consistent political messaging through this crisis. We haven't quite seen the degree of international cooperation, coordination, particularly among free societies, that's going to be required to get us out of this. We haven't quite seen a coordinated G20 action like we saw in 2008. And we've seen that this crisis has exposed vulnerabilities within the European Union, within the countries of Southeast Europe, and here in the United States. And we face that. We face up to that. But at the same time, I think we do need to see that there is an ability of open markets, open societies to mobilize. And this is, Matt referred to combating the disinformation to ensure that our people are equipped to handle this. We've seen, despite our own dysfunctionalities at times politically here, an extraordinarily quick response from the Federal Reserve, putting $4 to $5 trillion of financing into the system. We've seen a fiscal response that required agreement between Democrats and Republicans which is in excess of maybe 13% of GDP, and that's only increasing as we see action. And despite the political divisions, we've seen when it's really mattered an ability to get major majorities through Congress in agreement with the administration. And so I think there's a lot of questioning, a lot of concern out there. But when we think about what's happening right now and think about strategically, in the midst of all this, the European Union's opened accession negotiations with North Macedonia, Albania. We've just welcomed North Macedonia as our 30th ally. Welcome, Mr. Minister, to the alliance. We're delighted. And we see a United States across the political spectrum really beginning to work out strategically how we need to think about the coming competition with China. And so this is not clean. It's not been perfect. The response has not been completely commensurate with our, I would argue, our values or our interests. And yet, I think I see a silver lining. I see how our societies are mobilizing, and that is the power of free societies, as Matt was pointing out. And so I think ultimately we've got a Southeast Europe where this issue can play on cleavages, but I don't think we have a region that's up for grabs.
Okay. Great to hear this perspective. And if I might turn to Minister Dimitrov, you mentioned earlier that your country has welcomed European Union aid, and yet the realities of this pandemic is that it has closed borders within Europe and with the neighborhood and affected the prospects for increased trade and business ties in the region. Something that I should mention was included in the PRESPA agreement and was a big driver for the agreement as well between Greece and North Macedonia. So what would you like to see happening going forward to address the challenges by border closures? For instance, there is this promise by Europe for an expansion of green lanes for the region. Going forward, what would you like to see happening that might actually increase trade and investment and integrate economically as well the Western Balkans into the European environment?
Thank you for raising this very important point. As with probably all of my fellow colleagues, foreign ministers, our job has really changed. And especially in the first weeks of the crisis, I mostly did repatriation of our citizens from abroad. And here, it's not a one-way street. Solidarity is a two-way street. We also helped American citizens, many European citizens to go back to their homes, over 700 people from North Macedonia, and we managed to get, with the assistance of the foreign ministry, over 3,000 citizens back to North Macedonia. The second focus was making sure the tracks move. The freedom of movement of goods is vital for our region. We are a region that is geographically within the European Union. So there was a very early initiative of the Commission, the region, RCC, and the Secretariat of the CEFTA agreement to come up with this idea to have green lanes for movement of goods for trucks. And we were the first country who signed up, as we think that this is, I think, absolutely critical for both the economy, but also the very existence of all countries in the region. I would like to underline that we had few very friendly and very positive phone calls with Minister Dias in the early days of the crisis. We put the two heads of the crisis teams in the foreign ministry together, and we've been working closely on the needs of the citizens on both sides of the border, including those with medical needs, to be able to move. So for us, Greece has been one of the important windows to the world, as we closed our airports in Skopje and in Ohrid relatively early in the crisis. I think the Western Balkans, for a bigger picture, is for all economic purposes very much part of the European Union. We trade more than 3/4 of the trade of the region is with the common European market. More than 3/4 of the foreign investment in the region come from the European Union. So economically speaking, we are in that same boat. In terms of whether the region is up for grabs, I see a huge gap between the realities on the ground, and that also comes to assistance, COVID-related assistance, by the way, and the perception that is sometimes created or stimulated using the social media, online portals, spreading fake news. This region, geographically, economically, and by and large, politically, is moving towards the European Union, and almost all countries also towards NATO, those that are not part of the alliance yet. So I think we have to measure our assessment when we say whether the region is facing a geopolitical crossroad. I don't think this is the case. I think the region is firmly on its way toward the political West, and I think this is beyond any question. But the perception is somewhat different. In a way, the big machineries of the European Union are not always good in presenting what they actually do. These are very important, big amounts that are invested to help the region, but somehow in this fight for the hearts and minds of the Balkan citizens, we should probably do better in presenting these facts and making sure that people are aware of what is really happening on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this comment. And if I may turn, as we're going to the main topic of our event, if I may turn to Admiral Diakopoulos and ask him from the Greek perspective. We've seen Turkey International trying to exert soft power by sending aid to Britain, Italy, Spain, and the Western Balkans, even as it's facing a serious health and financial crisis at home. In a recent Atlantic Council event, I should note that Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu said that this aid is not based on political consideration. However, Greece has faced another image of Turkey, I should say, that of a neighbor that is forwarding migrants across the border with no regard for safety, health safety or security. What is the view from Greece about Turkey's overtures to countries in Europe and the Western Balkans?
Not so long ago, about 1 month ago, while the coronavirus has made its presence in China, but not in Europe yet, Turkey waged a hybrid war, a full hybrid war by the book with fake news and everything against Greece. This is something we have to say. Now, regarding the coronavirus and the Turkish help with medical equipment and that stuff, this is commendable. I mean, nobody should argue. And if we believe an article in New York Times about the situation in Turkey, and some dissenting articles in Turkish newspapers that they don't have enough masks for their personnel and their people in general, one can but admire the altruism of sending help to other countries while they don't have enough for their own. But the thing is not, listen, my belief is disaster diplomacy is good and is needed. The thing is, disaster diplomacy gains, they produce some gains, but they're short-term. I believe in institutions. The goodwill that we gain, you have to link it with some institutions. And what is important is what kind of cooperation we're going to have after the coronavirus crisis is temporarily at least over. When we're going to face economic problems, which we don't want them to become security problems. And this is the whole thing. So we have to stick to the basics. And the basics are a rule-based international system, the values that underpin these systems, the liberal values, democracy, cooperation, and respect for the international law.
Thank you for that. And if I may turn to... Yes.
No, and if I may just add a little bit, I mean, regarding area, the whole area of Balkans and Southeastern Europe and Turkey. When I read this quote from William Faulkner, he was referring to the American South, that the past is not dead, it's not even past. I'm afraid the same applied to our area as well.
Well, thank you for that. And if I may turn to Mr. Palmer, I would. You mentioned earlier the other tools of influence in the Western Balkans that worry the U.S. in the region, and I would like us to talk a little bit more about them, like the coordinated disinformation messages. Do you see an increase of such campaigns amid the pandemic, presenting the West as divided and incapable of handling the health crisis, or unwilling to support the region? If I may combine it with one of the questions that we've started receiving towards you, this is from Antis Gemenidis at HALC. Are you concerned that the support you just detailed, it looks like China is winning the COVID diplomacy game in the region?
Yeah, thanks for those two questions, Katerina. They're important questions. I'll take them in sequence. So sort of the first issue about disinformation, I think it's less that we've seen an uptick in disinformation efforts, because disinformation was a constant battle, not just in the Western Balkans, but around the world before COVID-19. I think what you do see is that there's been a shift in the messaging, the themes that run through disinformation efforts. Certainly those who are behind these efforts, including in particular states, are very effective in adapting that message to reflect the worries, concerns, the events of the moment. And what we need to do is we need to be constantly vigilant, to watch that space, to watch the information space, to identify active efforts to promote these kinds of disinformation narratives, and to push back against them, expose them for what they are, and to push out a counter narrative that's based on truth, that's based on hard data, that's based on facts, and ultimately to push the truth to win out through affirmation, repetition, and demonstration of fact as fact. We're working those issues together in partnership with the governments in the Western Balkans and Southeast Europe, but it's an ongoing struggle. You can never let down your guard. This is not a fight that you win. This is a challenge to be managed across the board. In terms of Andy's question more broadly, this issue of who's winning the narrative, I think it's important to emphasize here that assistance should not be a competition or a performance. And the United States welcomes all high quality assistance that is offered in a manner that is transparent and without political strings attached to it. If that comes from China or Russia, terrific. I do think, though, that we need to understand the nature of what assistance is. Some of the stuff that's being presented as assistance is not assistance as such, it's commercial deals. Countries are buying PPE or other forms of medical equipment on the open market, and those shipments are in some cases being misinterpreted or mischaracterized as representing assistance. In reality, what they are is a business deal. I think you may even have fallen into this yourself when you referred to Russian assistance to the United States. That was a commercial deal. We bought that stuff. We're buying PPE from Turkey, and we welcome the opportunity to import to the United States what we need to help take care of our own people, even as we work to provide assistance to partners and allies and countries that are in need. This, again, doesn't go in one direction. There is going to be a global coordinated response to a global challenge. So we're certainly aware that some countries are seeking to misuse or abuse the crisis to advance a political agenda.
Okay.
The United States is working to support a collective response to a collective health crisis and an economic challenge.
Thank you for this. And I'm sorry for the sun coming out behind me, but I'm grateful for it, but it doesn't look good on camera, right? If I may turn to Admiral Diakopoulos, or rather, sorry, to Damon. The Atlantic Council is also working on disinformation and to trying to tackle it. So I would like your perspective on the same question that I posed to Mr. Palmer, but as well, I would like you to answer a question from our participants. Comment on the decision of President Trump to stop the U.S. contribution to the World Health Organization, freeze it rather for a while, in juxtaposition with the decision of the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, for example, to play a leading role in these efforts. And this question is from Professor Theodoros Tsakidis.
Thank you, Katerina. Let me take both of those briefly. First of all, we're in the middle of not just a pandemic, but an infodemic, as our digital forensics research lab has been documenting, a term that I think the WHO itself has used as well. We have seen many of the same actors change tactic, but go on offense, and we're seeing extraordinary amounts of disinformation related to the coronavirus. This managing a pandemic is about public health, and a lot of this is about trust. And so what we see are adversaries that have been working to undermine a sense of trust in our institutions and our governance and in democracies, and this is providing them an opportunity to continue to play that same nefarious game. And so it's really quite atrocious and appalling, because people's lives are at stake in the mismanagement of information around this coronavirus. But it's something that we're very much plagued with, and we're on offense with our team that we have globally deployed, tracking disinformation, exposing this, and are publishing more than ever about these misleading narratives and storylines. This is part of the recovery, is helping to stay committed to educating our publics, our commitment to facts, and helping folks navigate what's real and not real through this process. That's where a lot of this is, we have a little bit of a propaganda war underway, a war of battle for hearts and minds. And what we're seeing, manipulation of some of these commercial deals, as Matt was pointing out, is assistance. And I think at the end of the day, societies are going to be open for how to help each other. And we want to put an emphasis particularly on how we demonstrate a sense of solidarity. I'd like to see more empathy, more solidarity coming from the United States with our allies and partners. But I think we're seeing that across our society, within the EU increasingly so. We're seeing our communities respond, local authorities respond in that vein as well, in a way that's going to be really real and significant. And the recipients of that type of assistance, they can distinguish between what is propaganda and what's real. The issue of the WHO, there are, I think the president has given voice to concerns that are pretty serious about some of our international institutions, including the WHO and its management of the issue at the onset of this pandemic. That said, I think it's a grave error and mistake to wield the weapon of saying that we will withdraw from these organizations or cut funding, as he has said in this case, because this is really where we want to help shape the future. We see in many cases that some of our institutions are not fit for purpose for the challenges that we're facing. In some respects, that's normal. It's our job to roll up our sleeves, do the hard work with our partners and allies to help make them fit for purpose for these things. And I'd like to see a United States has been pivotal in shaping many of these institutions, really get in the arena to shape their future. I'd like to see that by cajoling and pressure, but more so by catalyzing common action with many of our partners rather than threatening to withdraw or cut funding.
Thank you, Damon. And Minister Dimitrov, if I might turn to you, I remember the case of constructive disaster diplomacy was at the occasion of two devastating earthquakes back in 1999 in Greece and Turkey, which led to improved bilateral relations between the two countries. Are you hopeful? Do you see any signs that COVID-19 may provide such an opportunity for disaster diplomacy to be a catalyst for closer partnership among the countries of the Western Balkans, say between Serbia and Kosovo? On the other hand, and this is a question actually that's coming from the ambassador of Greece to the United States, Ms. Alexandros Diakopoulos, what do you think of the prospect of the use of the pandemic as a proposal for political change? Whether you think that was a catalyst for the fall of the Kurdi government in Kosovo?
I'd like to also publicly greet Alexandra and thank her for this rather challenging question. I have to say.
It was going to the whole panel, I have to say, but I thought I should direct it to you, and anyone else who wants to chip in, please do.
In the region, we are not strangers, but I think in line with the question, a quote of Victor Hugo comes to mind. It was used by Kristalina Georgieva when she announced the IMF projections on the state of the global economy. She said, she quoted, great perils have this beauty that they bring to light the fraternity of strangers. Now, as I said, we are not strangers in this region. We know each other very well. We are direct or indirect neighbors. And I sense that it's actually to some extent helping regional cooperation. For one, what we already discussed, the green lines for trucks, for movement of goods. This was in part an obvious shared interest that enabled us to come around and agree on this joint initiative and put it in practice. Then the initiative that I had to get a regional voice to ask the European Union to exclude the Balkans after they excluded non-EU members from Europe, such as Norway and others, from their special authorization scheme to export medical products, and they responded positively. When I called fellow foreign ministers from the region, we managed to get an agreement in a matter of 3 or 4 hours. So I think this common thread both us in the region, but I think this is completely applicable globally as well. We can use it to facilitate and jumpstart more cooperation. It was Javier Solana, a former Secretary General of NATO, a former High Representative of the European Union, who recently wrote that the key to overcoming the current challenge, the coronavirus, will be for the spread of sharing global best practices to outpace the spread of the virus. And I think the more we invest in cooperating, in sharing, the better it's going to be for all of us individually as nations. Now, I think, and I would like to bring him here in the spotlight, Matt Palmer would probably be better placed to respond to the concrete question on the Kurdish government.
Mr. Palmer, please do.
I think what I would begin with is to highlight the way in which we've seen Serbia and Kosovo cooperating in responding to the COVID challenge in a manner that is encouraging, something that we would like to reinforce and support, and hopefully could serve as a model for further cooperation going forward. The health ministers have been in contact and they've been working together to manage this shared challenge. Serbia has provided test kits to Kosovo because they recognize that Kosovo is the challenge in Kosovo is a challenge in Serbia. It all needs to be managed collectively. In terms of the politics, the United States would very much like to see Serbia and Kosovo find a path forward back to the dialogue table. We would like to see both not just the tariffs, but also the reciprocity measures that were in place that are barriers to trade removed, both to support economic growth and also to provide a path forward back to dialogue. It's up to the leadership in Kosovo, to the political parties, to the elected leaders, to determine the shape of Kosovo's next government going forward, the makeup of the next governing coalition. What's important here is that all of the actors in Kosovo operate within the framework of Kosovo's constitution and the laws of Kosovo. And we will continue to support our partners in Kosovo in addressing the challenge of COVID-19 and supporting Kosovo's integration into the international system.
Thank you. Admiral Diakopoulos, in Greece, I should add, we've also received some aid from China, which has not been quantified in dollar terms. And we, as Mr. Palmer mentioned, we've also received purchased medical supplies that China has presented as a gift, even though they were paid for by Greek donors. Do you see a Chinese effort to use this opportunity to build leverage and influence in the region, including in Greece? And as a member of the European Union, how is the Greek experience different to that of the Western Balkan states?
Yes. China, to be honest, and to tell the things as they are, they have influence and a presence in the Union. It's not something new, and they have it not only in Greece through the port of Piraeus, but they have it in the Balkans in general. Apart from that, China has interests in Europe as well, because they need the markets for their products. They need the port of Piraeus to go well, to be prosperous in order to gain from their investment. Greece and China, they have very good relations. And it was good that we managed to take some medical equipment, which we needed which we needed a lot for the corona pandemic. But as you said, it was not exactly a gift. Greek donors paid for it. Now, regarding your second questions about the European Union, although the European Union has been very much criticized for its reaction, that it was a late reaction, that it was not enough, I personally, and on every level, the level of security as well as the economy, I'm very glad that Greece, at this time, at this difficult time, is a member of the European Union. And since I was telling you before that, okay, disaster diplomacy is something good, and it gives an opportunity of goodwill, so you can build on that. I don't believe in goodwill. I believe in institutions. So with the other countries of the Western Balkans, we share a common past. We have some common historical experiences, and we have a common history. And hopefully we will share a common future when they become members of the European Union and NATO.
Thank you. Thank you, Admiral. And talking about institutions, and if I may turn to Damon with a question from our audience from Elmas Hassanovic. One of the principles of NATO is smart defense, which means not doubting the resources. Most of the NATO allies are members of the EU. Is there any possibility for common approach in dealing with crisis situations in order to strengthen the resilience of our societies? Meaning different types of crises like floods, wildfires, pandemic, but also migration and disinformation and hybrid threats. And what do you see the role of NATO within this pandemic being? How would you rate?
So we had a good town hall last week with the NATO Deputy Secretary General Mircea Joana, who's from Southeast Europe, from Romania, just after defense ministers met, and they reviewed and in fact took a fair number of decisions about NATO assistance and making available NATO military assets to provide support to civilian authorities as appropriate in the context of this pandemic. We saw NATO allies responding through a coordination mechanism that is set up at the NATO headquarters, the Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Coordination Center, that sent coordinated supplies actually to North Macedonia, the newest ally, receiving some support and solidarity from other NATO allies. I think in all of these cases, as we're seeing right now in this pandemic, there's national authorities have the lead and civilian authorities are in charge. The European Union has a significant role to play in terms of integrating the efforts across the European Union and really helping to map forward a coordinated economic recovery. But the alliance has a supporting role here, and one is to make available military assets to support the civilian response, as we've seen in flooding in the Western Balkans. We can now see in helping to mobilize and transport support for PPE and other equipment being sent to allies. But it also has its traditional role to play, that in the midst of a global crisis like this, adversaries, whether they be non-state actors like terrorists or great powers like Russia or China, can look to take advantage of these gaps of attention. And so I think the alliance has a very important role to play in partnership with the European Union of demonstrating both the resilience of our members, of our allies at home, and their continuing ability to deter from our adversaries trying to take advantage of this vulnerable opportunity.
Thank you, Damon. And as we're drawing to our last 10 minutes of this webinar, and thank you all for your contributions and to our audience for all the questions, I would like to turn back to my original question and make sure you all have an opportunity to see ahead and make your predictions about how this crisis is going to affect the region of the Western Balkans and Southeast Europe. What do you think are the preconditions that you would like to see in order for the region to emerge stronger out of this crisis? And rather than shift towards political alignment with authoritarian states, that is, I guess, the main concern of our topic today. So what can the transatlantic community and what would you like to see happening in order to promote the stability and the prosperity in the region? And if I may start with Minister Dimitrov.
Thank you so much. I think both for us as a region, but also globally, we have, and I don't recall reading a more precise explanation in a way of the two big questions that we face globally in the context of this pandemic. I think one, the big question, the big crossroad is whether we wake up after the crisis in a world where we have more nationalistic isolationism or more global solidarity. And what we do in our daily decisions in fighting this pandemic will contribute to our choice globally after the crisis. I think we have to win this battle together. This virus cannot be dealt with within one's borders. If we defeat the virus in one country, then and not in its neighborhood, then it will come back. So I think it's notorious that this is a threat, and we have to deal with it in global solidarity. The second question, which is more in terms of good governance, is whether democracies or dictatorships or those semi-authoritarian regimes are more efficient in dealing with such a crisis. And here, I think we have to have the watchdog of the free media on practices, on measures that are trying to face and confront the virus, but at the same time create unproportionate limitations to human rights and the way we have organized our societies. So I think here the choice is between totalitarian surveillance and citizens' empowerment. And this is the Israeli writer Harari in a beautiful article in the Financial Times. For our region, I would like to see a region that is more about togetherness, is more about regional cooperation, and is more about aligning our policies with those of our friends and allies, the European Union, the United States, and others. Right? As if we agree, or if it's arguable that the European Union has been somewhat slow at the start of the crisis, I think now the big machinery of the Union is very much delivering concrete and tangible assistance. We are part of the joint procurement. We are eligible for the European Solidarity Fund. I mentioned the macro-financial assistance. I think the more we are plugged into these measures and policies, the sooner and the better we're going to recover as a region from this crisis. And also, I think for bilateral issues and relations in our region, when we face a common challenge, we should use the sentiment of togetherness and apply it to bilateral relations as well. If the situation in Greece is a positive one, if Greece is doing a good job in facing the crisis, as it's quite obvious, this is good news for us as a neighbor, North Macedonia. Where we do good things, this is good for Greece as a neighbor. And I think the more of this sentiment we can use, the better the region will be.
Thank you, Minister. Admiral Diakopoulos, if I may have your last words.
Yes, thank you very much, Katerina. I think I covered some of the answers during my previous interventions, but it's okay, I will repeat them now.
Briefly.
You know, there's some, yes, as quickly as I can. If I have to say it in 2 words, we have to change the title from Up for Grabs to Up for More Cooperation. I believe that cooperation pays off much more than confrontation, and much more in the long term than confrontation. So I believe that after the corona crisis, we should have more cooperation in every level, in every aspect. Thank you very much.
Mr. Palmer?
Thanks very much, Katerina. Going forward, I think the economic consequences of the COVID-19 crisis in Southeast Europe are going to be profound. And we are going to help, we're going to need to all partner together to help the country navigate through the economic challenges and the political challenges that will come along with those kinds of pressures. I do believe the resource base that the transatlantic community brings to bear in addressing and resolving these crises, these challenges, dwarfs anything else that's out there. We're committed to deploying these resources effectively and in partnership with the countries of the region to help manage the immediate health crises, the economic crises of the moment, and the economic crises to come, even after the COVID-19 virus, the threat of the virus has been successfully addressed. I'm also hopeful that the countries of the Western Balkans are going to come away from this with an understanding that cooperative approaches to shared challenges produces results. We've certainly seen some of this in terms of the Green Lanes initiative. We've seen it in terms of efforts to make the governing institutions in Bosnia-Herzegovina more effective. We've seen it in the cooperative approach that Belgrade and Pristina have taken to COVID-19. That's a good basis upon which to build going forward.
Thank you. And Damon?
Thank you very much. I just think we have to remember what's at stake here. We are so invested in how our societies emerge from this crisis. And that at the Atlantic Council, we're doing a lot of work on what could happen, looking at various scenarios. But we're more interested in what should happen. And so I think we need to be figuring out how we mobilize as a common community with our partners and allies in Southeast Europe, among free societies, with our allies globally, to shape a better post-COVID-19 world and shape that outcome actively. So that's where I think our headspace needs to be. What we're going to learn coming out of this is that there's no substitute for good governance. There's accountability, responsibility, and national authorities at home, and those weaknesses come through in a crisis like this, and that puts a real priority on good governance at home. Second, the fact of regional and international cooperation. This is a pandemic. This is a situation in which your neighbor's success is fundamental to your own success. And I think that's really a priority in Southeast Europe, where not every country is a member of the European Union or NATO yet. Will be one day, but the idea that shared success is fundamental to this region. And I think that's what Greece and North Macedonia have modeled in their relationships and their diplomacy. But it's something that's, I think, imperative more than ever across the region, where the United States can help play a catalytic role there as well. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank you all, to our participants, for your time and your hopeful input, which is particularly welcome at this time of crisis. And of course, to our audience for their insightful questions. Our organizers, the Delphi Economic Forum and the Atlantic Council, please stay healthy, be creative, and as the new title of our panel, cooperative. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Stay
Cheers.
safe.